Great Expectations is a novel by Charles Dickens, one of the most famous novelists of the Victorian era. He was born in Portsmouth on February 7, 1812, in an originally wealthy family. His father worked in the Marine Office, while his mother was the daughter of a civil servant. However, he was later found to live a poor and troubled life because of some financial problems. In 1824, his childhood was deeply marked by the capture of his father because of debts, and Dickens, despite his interest in literature, abandoned his studies and began working in a factory at only 12 years old. Here he came in touch with the lower social classes and with the scandal of child labor, which was very widespread in England at that time. After his father was freed from prison, Dickens continued to work in various fields until he decided to start a career as a journalist. At the age of 24, he began to publish in the magazine The Pickwick Circle in installments, which was immediately successful, as well as all the works that came later. The second novel, written entirely in first person after David Copperfield, is Great Expectations, also published in installments between 1860 and 1861 in the magazine all the year around. Classified as Peyton's Roman, the main character Philip Pirrip, better known to everyone as Pip, tells his story in a humorous way. Orphan of about 6 years old, he lives with his sister, a very rough and strict woman, and his brother-in-law Joe Carteret, the blacksmith of the village, the only one giving luck to the boy, seemingly destined to become his assistant. Near the cemetery, while visiting the graves of his parents, Pip meets a man who escaped from prison, also called the convict, who asks him to get some food and a file to free himself from his chains. The kid, scared, follows the instructions without knowing that this gesture will mark the most important change in his life. After some time, the young boy is called to play and entertain the rich Miss Havisham, who lives inside his house, a decaying mansion abandoned to itself. The woman has been living in this house since the day of her wedding, after being abandoned by her future husband, an event from which she was unable to recover. Therefore, she adopted a little girl, Estella, whom she raised to carry out her revenge on the male gender. Indeed, Estella is cold and emotionless, but Pip, on the contrary, falls madly in love with her and continues to attend Sadie's house as long as he is allowed to. After a series of difficulties, he receives an anonymous inheritance that enables him to undertake the journey to become a gentleman, abandoning the profession of blacksmith that was making him unhappy. Under the tutelage of the lawyer Mr. Jaggers, the rest of the narrative takes place in London, where he meets all the new characters who are going to join him in the future adventures he has to face after discovering the identity of his mysterious benefactor, Abel Magwitch, better known in the book as the convict, who never forgot the kind gesture of little Pip. There have been several film reproductions of the book, most recently in 2012, which decently follows the unfolding of the story, except for some responsibly undeveloped events. However, a very relevant fact in the story is the aggression and subsequent death of Pip's sister, which is not shown in the film, as well as the character responsible for the event, Orlick, a blacksmith's helper who has always resented the orphan. Another shortcoming is the slow death of Miss Havisham, because of severe burns after her whole dress was caught in the flames of the fireplace, as we also see on screen due to a candle, the very last scene in which the woman is present. The discovery of Estella's real parents is also important, occurring gradually over the course of the novel, but cinematically adapted in a conversation between the boy and his tutor. Similarly, there are substantial differences in the relationship between Pip and Estella, which is definitely tenderer than her uncaring attitude in the book. Even in the film adaptation, though, their meeting in the end seems to give a little hope for the main character's feelings. The background theme in this work is the status of the single individuals within a society. The story itself revolves around the main character's hopes of advancing to a higher social class in order to get his beloved, who is from a wealthy family. There is a similarity to the author's own experiences, as in most of his works, which succeed in conveying a lot of authenticity by the narrator. If we use a magnifying glass, we can see that all ranks of social classes are included in the story. The richest, Miss Havisham, the middle class, Mr. Pumblechook, the poorest inhabitants of the village, Biddy and Joe, and the worst criminals, Abel Magwitch. Great Expectations is to be considered as the novel of Charles Dickens' maturity and among the most promiscuous results of his art. Maturity that has to be considered as another main theme. More in detail, the protagonist narrates from a point of view of relative maturity and experience, with a suffering and disillusioned tone, but at the same time full of humor, as he traces his childhood, adolescence, youth and maturity, to which is associated a moral development of innocence, guilt and regeneration. The world experienced by Pip indeed is filled with doubts that take place with a tragic nature because of the way he finds himself at the mercy of events. Throughout the description, these uncertainties and instabilities of life are evidenced, as in the equally uncertain ending that gives the reader's imagination the task of interpreting the last meeting between Pip and Estella. The historical context inevitably places another recurring aspect in the story, namely the persistent pursuit of improvement and education. This was especially due to the meeting with Miss Havisham and Estella, which makes the boy able to make a comparison between himself, who was learning the basics of reading and writing, and Joe, totally illiterate, thus beginning to see literacy as the only means of social advancement. With this idea, he never chose any specific profession, but continued to study even in the middle of London's economic and moral dissipations. Pip is actually the only one of Dickensian first-person narrators who is not a real writer, nor does he show any writing charisma while narrating. However, the ability that Dickens had instead made it possible for him to leave readers in suspense at the end of each chapter that was published in the newspapers. Obviously, in this way, anyone was induced to buy the next issue, and so it was given to the story a great reputation, both in its era of publication and in the latest ones until today. My choice of this work, although commonplace, depended on the title. Expectation in many situations is the only remaining glow of light that we can rely on, and curiosity led me to try to understand better what kind of great expectations were those described by Dickens. The expectations in this case are meant as future hopes of what is to come and of what we will be or could be. Above all, I found interesting the idea of following page by page the development of a single character in this journey of misfortune and fortune. The first-person narrative convinced me even more. Having in front of your eyes what is going on in someone's head helps you to better empathize with what they are going through. The Dickensian style, in my opinion, perfectly succeeds in recreating this effect. While reading, indeed, I felt like I was reliving those memories with him, as if some of the events had happened in my presence. The description of his mood and emotions come through directly and clearly, in spite of the extended turns of phrase, however fundamental for enriching in detail the feeling experienced by the narrator, to the point of making me share with him his irony and his tears throughout this roller coaster of a life. The film, unfortunately, cannot provide the same result as a first-person narration, since several of the characters' actions seem almost nonsense if observed only from the outside, revealing the anti-hero he really is, selfish and concerned only with his own interests.